Welcome to Witches and Yoga Pants, your cozy corner of the cosmos, where modern magic meets everyday life. We're here to explore magic, mindfulness, and personal growth with a grounded, no-fluff vibe. Whether you're into moon rituals, tarot spreads, or just trying to survive Mercury retrograde, you are in the right place. So get ready to disrupt some old patterns, explore what it means to reclaim your power, and remember who you really are. So pull up your yoga mat, light a candle, and let's get into it. Hello and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've heard me mention human design more than a few times. We've talked about authority, strategy, centers, gates, conditioning, and how your chart can offer incredible insight into the way you're designed to move through life. But recently, I realized something. While I've referenced the 5 human design types so many times in different conversations, I've never actually sat down and devoted an entire episode to understanding what it's really like to live as each one. Because that's what I love most about human design. It doesn't just give us information, it gives us a language for experiences that we've had over our entire lives that maybe never really knew how to explain. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with over the years who came into a session believing there was something fundamentally wrong with them. They thought they weren't being disciplined enough, productive enough, motivated enough, decisive enough, or confident enough. They had spent years comparing themselves to other people and assuming they were somehow falling short. Then we look at their human design chart, and suddenly so many pieces begin to fall into place. Maybe they're a projector who has spent their entire life trying to keep up with generator energy. Or maybe they're a manifestor who's been told since childhood to stop being so bossy or impulsive. Maybe they're a manifesting generator who's always felt guilty for changing direction halfway through a project. Maybe they're a reflector who has spent years wondering why they seem to become a different version of themselves depending on who they're around. Or maybe they're a generator who's been saying yes with their head instead of their gut for so long they can't even remember what genuine excitement feels like anymore. The relief that comes from understanding your design isn't because someone hands you all the answers. It's because sometimes for the very first time, you stop asking yourself, what's wrong with me? And instead, you begin asking a much better question. What if I've simply been trying to live in a way that wasn't designed for me? That is a very different conversation. Now, before we dive into each type, I want to make something really clear. Your human design type is not your personality. It doesn't tell us whether you're funny or serious, outgoing or quiet, creative or analytical. It doesn't tell us your interests, your values, or your life experiences. Those things are shaped by so many different pieces in your chart, as well as your upbringing, your environment, and your own choices. Your type is something much more foundational. It describes how your energy naturally interacts with life. Think of it like a current in a river. Every river eventually reaches the ocean. Some rivers rush quickly through narrow canyons. Others wind slowly through wide valleys. Some are calm and peaceful, while others are powerful enough to carve mountains over thousands of years. None of those rivers are doing it wrong. They simply are moving according to their nature. Human design suggests that people are much the same way. The challenge is that most of us spent most of our lives trying to force ourselves to flow like someone else's river. And eventually it becomes exhausting. So today, my hope isn't that you'll memorize every detail about your type. My hope is that you'll hear something about yourself somewhere in this conversation. Maybe you'll finally understand why certain things have always felt easy for you, while other things have felt like an uphill battle. Maybe you'll stop judging yourself for not being like everyone else. And maybe you'll begin offering yourself a little bit more compassion. Because every single human design type has incredible gifts. Every single type also has challenges. No type is better than another, they're just different. Let's start with the type that makes up about 70% of the population, generators. Generators are often described as the builders of the world. They carry sustainable life force energy through their defined sacral center, which means that when they're engaged in work, relationships, hobbies, or experiences that are genuinely correct for them, they have an incredible capacity for consistent energy. Notice I said when they're engaged with what's correct, not all the time. This is one of the biggest misconceptions I hear. People think that being a generator means having an endless supply of energy, and it doesn't. Generators aren't designed to work endlessly. They're designed to have energy for the things that light them up, and that's a huge difference. Think back to a time when you were completely absorbed in something that you loved. Maybe you were gardening or building something or painting. Hours passed by without you noticing. You felt energized instead of drained. That's generator energy in alignment. Now, think about the opposite. Have you ever stayed in a job you hated because it paid well? Have you ever committed to obligations you secretly dreaded? Said yes because you didn't want to disappoint anyone? Most generators know exactly what that feels like because their energy doesn't disappear overnight. It slowly leaks away every time they betray what their body is telling them. One of the beautiful things about generators is that they aren't designed to initiate from the mind. They're designed to respond when life presents something. It can be a conversation, an invitation, or an opportunity. And then their body answers, and it doesn't come from their thoughts, it comes from their body. I think this is where so many generators become disconnected from themselves. From the time we're children, we're asked questions that train us to answer from our minds. What do you want to be when you grow up? What should you major in? What career choices make sense? What looks good? We're rarely taught to pause long enough to ask, what does my body actually want? Your sacral response isn't logical, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes your mind says yes while your body says no, and sometimes your body lights up over something that looks completely irrational on paper. Learning to trust that response is one of the greatest lessons a generator can learn, because satisfaction doesn't come from doing what makes sense, it comes from doing what feels alive. One thing I've noticed in practice is that many generators don't struggle because they don't know what they love. They struggle because they've become so practiced at overriding themselves that they can't hear their own excitement anymore. They've learned to prioritize responsibility over joy, obligation over curiosity, logic over intuition. If that's you, I want you to know something. You haven't lost your sacral response. It's still there. It might just be buried beneath years of conditioning. One of the easiest ways to begin reconnecting with this is to pay attention to your energy throughout the day. What conversations leave you feeling more alive? What projects make time disappear? Who do you look forward to seeing? What feels heavy before you even begin? Your body has probably been answering these questions for years, and you might not have been listening. When generators are living in alignment, their signature emotion is satisfaction. There's a deep contentment that comes from using their energy in ways that nourish both themselves and the people around them. When they're out of alignment, frustration shows up. I love frustration because it's actually a wonderful teacher. It isn't punishment, it's feedback. It's your body gently saying, this isn't it. Sometimes the most aligned thing a generator can do is admit that something no longer excites them. And that can be incredibly difficult in a world that celebrates pushing through. Now let's talk about the cousin to the generator, the manifesting generator. At first glance, manifesting generators can look very similar because they also have that defined sacral center. They also respond to life. And they also thrive when they're doing work they genuinely enjoy. But there's another layer to their energy. Manifesting generators are often here to explore, to experiment, to take the scenic route, to discover better, faster, and more creative ways of doing things. If you've ever met someone who has 6 different careers, learned 3 instruments, renovated a house, started a business, and somehow still has time to train for a marathon, there's a decent chance you're looking at a manifesting generator. Their minds are curious and their energy moves quickly. And they often surprise even themselves with how rapidly they can master something that genuinely excites them. Unfortunately, this also makes them one of the most understood types. One of the things I hear from manifesting generators all the time is, I just can't seem to stick with anything. Maybe you've said that to yourself. Maybe you started a business only to realize 6 months later that your passion had shifted. Maybe you'd taken up photography, then pottery, then hiking, then learning a new language, and somewhere along the way you started wondering if there was something wrong with you because everyone else seems capable of choosing one thing and sticking with it. If you're a manifesting generator, I want to gently challenge that story. What if changing direction isn't evidence that you're flaky? What if it's evidence that you're learning? Manifesting generators often discover what they love by experiencing what they don't. They're not meant to sit in a room and think their way through a perfect answer. They're designed to engage with life and respond to what shows up, and then notice what happens in their body. Sometimes that means you'll outgrow things. Sometimes you'll change your mind. Sometimes you'll realize halfway through a project that there's a better way to do it rather than the way that everyone else has always done it. That doesn't make you inconsistent. It makes you adaptive. I think one of the greatest gifts manifesting generators bring into the world is innovation. They have this incredible ability to see efficiencies that other people miss. They'll look at a 10-step process and naturally ask, why are we doing all 10? Can't we accomplish the same thing in 6? Now, sometimes that drives people around them absolutely crazy because everyone else is still following the instructions while manifesting generators have already found a shortcut. But very often, they're right. They're here to question the process, to improve the process, or to create a new process. The challenge comes when they try to force themselves into a life that values predictability over curiosity. I think many manifesting generators grow up receiving mixed messages. On one hand, they're praised for being talented and capable. On the other hand, they're told they need to finish everything they start. Now, don't get me wrong, there's value in follow through. There are absolutely times when persistence matters, but there's a difference between finishing something because your sacral is still engaged and finishing something because your mind thinks quitting it would make you a failure. Sometimes completion looks like crossing a finish line, and sometimes completion looks like realizing you've learned everything you can learn from the situation and then allowing yourself to move on. One of my favorite things to remind manifesting generators is that your life isn't meant to look linear. You're allowed to have chapters, you're allowed to reinvent yourself, you're allowed to discover that the person you were 5 years ago is interested in different things than the person you are today. That isn't failure, that's growth. When manifesting generators are living in alignment, they experience satisfaction, just like generators. But there's often another feeling mixed in there, and it's a sense of freedom. They feel free to follow what genuinely excites them without apologizing for the winding path that got them there. When they're out of alignment, frustration shows up, sometimes accompanied by impatience. They can feel trapped by routines that no longer fit or by commitments that their energy has already moved past. If you're a manifesting generator, I want you to ask yourself something. Where have you been judging yourself for changing your mind? And is it possible that your changing interests aren't evidence that you lack commitment, but evidence that you're continuing to evolve? Sometimes your next path only becomes visible because you had the courage to leave the last one. Now, let's shift to one of my favorite types to talk about, projectors. As many of you know, I'm a projector myself. So while I'll do my best to stay objective, this is also my type, and I understand it from the inside out. Projectors make up roughly 20% of the population, and unlike generators and manifesting generators, they do not have consistent sacral energy. That one difference changes almost everything. We live in a world that celebrates productivity. Busyness has become a badge of honor. People ask, "What do you do?" long before they ask who you are. Success is often measured by how much we produce, how many hours we work, or how many things we can check off a list. For someone with sustainable sacral energy, that model can work reasonably well. But for a projector, it can become exhausting. Not because projectors are lazy. Let's clear up that right now. Projectors are not lazy. In fact, many of the projectors I've worked with are some of the hardest working people I've ever met. The problem isn't effort. The problem is where the effort is being directed. Projectors aren't here to outwork everyone else. They're here to understand people, to guide energy, to recognize potential, and to see what others miss. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately noticed the dynamic between people? Have you ever watched someone struggle and instantly known the question you wanted to ask that would change everything for them? Have you ever looked at a business, a relationship, or a situation and thought, if just this one thing shifted? That's projector energy. Projectors have an incredible ability to recognize systems, patterns, and inefficiencies. They often see solutions long before anyone else does. The challenge is that seeing something and being invited to share what you see are two totally different things. This is where the strategy of waiting for the invitation gets misunderstood. People hear that and imagine projectors sitting on the couch waiting for life to happen, and that's not what it means. Waiting for the invitation isn't about becoming passive. It's about recognizing that your wisdom is most impactful when it's received. Think of the last time someone tried to give you advice you didn't ask for. Even if it was brilliant advice, were you ready to hear it? Probably not. Now think about the last time you were truly struggling and asked someone you trusted for guidance. You were open, you were listening, you were ready, and the advice didn't change. Your receptivity did. Projectors are designed to share their insight where it's welcomed. That doesn't mean you hide your gifts. It means you allow yourself to be seen. You continue learning, you continue developing your wisdom, you continue living authentically, and the right people begin recognizing what you naturally bring. One thing I've noticed over and over again with projectors is that so many of them spend years trying to earn recognition instead of trusting that authentic recognition feels different. When we're trying to earn it, we overextend ourselves. We become the person who says yes to everything. We stay late, we work harder, we become indispensable. We hope that if we just prove our value enough that someone will finally see us. But that's not recognition. It's exhaustion disguised as achievement. True recognition feels very different. It's someone saying, "I value how you see the world. I'd love your perspective. Can you help me understand this?" It isn't something you force. It's something that naturally develops as you become more fully you. And honestly, it's one of the hardest lessons for many projectors because we've been conditioned to believe that our worth comes from what we do. Human design gently reminds us that our worth has never been a question. Our value isn't measured by how exhausted we are at the end of the day. It's measured by the clarity we bring into the lives of others. That doesn't mean projectors don't work. Of course they do. Many projectors build incredible businesses, raise families, create art, lead organizations, and accomplish many amazing things. The difference is that when they're living in alignment, they're working with their energy instead of constantly trying to overpower it. They know when to rest, when to step back. They'll understand that rest isn't something they earn after burnout. It's part of how they're designed. I wish more projectors understood that because the guilt around rest runs deep. How many times have you found yourself relaxing while also thinking about everything you should be doing? How often have you apologized for needing downtime? How often have you looked at someone else's capacity and assumed yours should look the same? If that's been your experience, I hope you'll begin replacing judgment with curiosity. Instead of asking, why can't I keep up? Try asking, what if I was never designed to? When projectors are living in alignment, their signature feeling is success. Not necessarily financial success or career success, although those certainly happen. It's the feeling of knowing your gifts are being recognized and appreciated. When they're out of alignment, bitterness often appears. Bitterness isn't something to be ashamed of. It's feedback. It's your design gently knowing that somewhere along the line, you've been trying to force what was never meant to be forced. Sometimes the path back isn't working harder. Sometimes it's allowing yourself to be seen more authentically than ever before. Now, let's talk about the type that often feels the most misunderstood. Manifestors. Manifestors make up only 9% of the population, which means that many of them go through life without ever meeting someone who moves through the world quite like they do. Manifestors are the initiators. They're the spark, they're the catalyst. They're the people who often feel an internal urge to begin something before anyone else even realizes it's possible. One of the things I find fascinating about manifestors is that they don't always know where that urge comes from. And manifestors don't always know where that urge comes from. It simply arrives. Maybe they wake up one morning and decide it's time to move across the country. Maybe they suddenly know it's time to leave a relationship or start a business, write a book, or completely change the direction of their life. To everyone around them, it can seem spontaneous. But for the manifestor, it usually doesn't feel impulsive. It feels inevitable. And it's as if something inside them finally said, now. The challenge is that this type often experiences conditioning very early in life. Imagine a little child who naturally wants to initiate, who decides the game everyone's going to play, who says, let's build a fort, and suddenly all the neighborhood kids are following along. That child isn't necessarily trying to be controlling. They're doing exactly what their energy is designed to do. But adults don't always see it that way. Who do you think you are? You need to ask permission. Stop telling everyone what to do. Slow down and wait your turn. Over time, many manifestors begin to question their own instincts. Instead of trusting that inner urge, they start looking outside themselves for approval. They wait for permission. They ask everyone else's opinion. They second guess themselves. And this isn't because that's who they are, but because it's who they learned they needed to become in order to fit in. One of the most freeing concepts in human design for manifestors is understanding their energy is designed to initiate. That doesn't mean acting recklessly. It doesn't mean ignoring the people around them. It means trusting that internal creative pulse when it arrives. Now, there's another important piece to manifestor strategy, and that's informing. This is another concept that's misunderstood. Informing is not asking permission. It's offering clarity. Let's say you've decided to leave your job. You don't need to ask your spouse, your coworkers, or your friends if you're allowed to follow your own inner knowing. But letting the important people in your life know what you're doing creates far less resistance than disappearing one day and expecting everybody else to catch up with you. Think about how differently you feel when somebody says, hey, I wanted to let you know I've decided to take a new opportunity, compared to finding out they've already packed their bags and left. This decision might be exactly the same, but informing creates trust. It gives people a chance to adjust. And one thing I love about manifestors is their courage. They're often willing to go first, to try something no one else has tried, to create something that didn't exist before. Every single innovation, every movement, every business, every invention started because someone initiated it. That energy is deeply needed in this world. The challenge comes when manifestors begin believing that they have to make themselves smaller in order to be accepted. I've worked with manifestors who've spent years apologizing for their intensity, apologizing for their independence and taking up space. But the world doesn't need smaller manifestors. It needs healthy ones. Manifestors who communicate, who inform, and who trust themselves without feeling like they need to bulldoze everyone around them. There's a huge difference between confidence and control. When manifestors are aligned, their signature emotion is peace. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're following your own inner impulses instead of waiting for someone else to tell you it's okay. When they're out of alignment, anger shows up. And again, anger's not punishment, it's information. Sometimes it's the result of feeling blocked. Sometimes it's because they've given away their authority. Sometimes it's because they've spent so long suppressing their natural energy that it finally erupts. If you're a manifestor listening today, I want to ask you something. Where have you been waiting for permission that no one was ever meant to give you? Where have you been shrinking yourself because someone once told you that your power made them uncomfortable? Because your job isn't to become less powerful. It's to learn how to use your power consciously. Now, let's move to our final type, reflectors. Reflectors are the rarest type in human design, making up only about 1% of the population. Reflectors often spend a lifetime feeling different without understanding why. One of the unique things about reflectors is that all of their centers are undefined. Now, if you've listened to previous episodes, you know that undefined centers are places where we experience and amplify energy from the people around us. For reflectors, that experience extends across their entire chart. They're deeply influenced by their environment, by the people they spend time with, the communities they belong to, and by the energy of the spaces they occupy. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about reflectors is the idea that they don't know who they are. This is not true. Reflectors know themselves through experience. Imagine standing beside a perfectly still lake. The lake reflects whatever's around it, the mountains, the sky, the trees, the clouds. The lake is not confused about what it is. Its gift is reflection. Reflectors have a remarkable ability to show us the health of the environments they're in. If a reflector is thriving, it's often a sign that the people and community surrounding them are healthy. If they're struggling, it's worth looking at the environment before assuming there's something wrong with the reflector. I think that's incredibly important because our culture tends to focus on fixing the individual. Human design reminds us that sometimes the environment is the thing that needs to change. Reflectors are also designed to give themselves more time when making important decisions. This doesn't mean they can never make a quick choice about what to eat for lunch or which route to drive home. We're talking about bigger decisions, relationships, career changes, moving, major commitments. Traditionally, human design encourages reflectors to move through a full lunar cycle before making significant decisions. And while that may sound frustrating in our fast-paced world, there's wisdom in it. Reflectors often get more clarity through time. Each conversation, each day, each experience reveals another piece of the picture. One thing I love about reflectors is the perspective they bring. Because they're sampling so many different energies, they often notice things that the rest of us overlook. They're incredibly observant. They're often wise in quiet ways. They're mirrors that help the rest of us see ourselves more clearly. When reflectors are living in alignment, their signature feeling is surprise. They're able to stay open to the unexpected beauty that life continually offers. When they're out of alignment, disappointment begins to settle in. Again, disappointment isn't failure. It's feedback, and it's an invitation to ask, is this still the right environment for me? And are these still my people? Does this place still support who I'm becoming? If you're a reflector listening today, I'd encourage you to stop measuring yourself by consistency. Your wisdom may not come from being the same every day. It might come from noticing what changes and why. Sometimes your greatest gift isn't having all the answers. It's helping the rest of us ask better questions. As we've walked through each of the 5 human design types today, I hope you'll notice something. While every type has different gifts, different challenges, and different ways of interacting with the world, none of them are being asked to become someone else. They're simply being invited to become more fully themselves. Human design reminds us that maybe we don't have to keep forcing ourselves into a version of life that never felt natural in the first place. Think about how much energy we spend trying to become someone else. The projector trying to keep up with the generator trying to force themselves into work that doesn't excite them because it looks successful from the outside. The manifestor asking for permission every step of the way. The manifesting generator convincing themselves they have to choose one passion for the rest of their lives. And reflectors believing they're inconsistent because they change with their environment. Imagine if all of that energy could be redirected, not toward becoming different, towards becoming more authentic. How much lighter would life feel? One of the things I tell clients all the time is that awareness comes before change. You won't wake up tomorrow and completely overhaul your life because you listen to this podcast. You don't have to quit your job or end your relationship or move across the country or suddenly start making every decision perfectly according to your human design. This work isn't about perfection, but it's about awareness. Maybe after today's episode, you'll simply begin noticing. You'll notice what lights your body up. You'll notice when frustration starts creeping in. You'll notice when you're trying to prove yourself instead of trusting yourself, and you'll notice when you're asking for permission you don't really need. You may notice environments where you feel more like yourself, and those small moments of awareness begin creating entirely different lives over time. Because every aligned decision leads to another aligned decision. Every moment of self-trust strengthens the next one. Every time you honor your own energy instead of abandoning it, you reinforce the message that your inner wisdom is safe to follow. I also think it's important to remember that we're all conditioned, every single one of us. Human design doesn't remove conditioning overnight. If anything, it helps us recognize it. And once we recognize it, we have a choice. We can continue living from old stories, or we can begin experimenting with something different. You don't have to get your design right. You simply have to become curious. What happens if I wait to respond instead of forcing? What happens if I honor my need for rest? What happens if I give myself permission to change directions? What happens if I trust the timing of my decisions? What happens if I stop comparing my path to someone else's? Those questions are where transformation begins. Not because human design has all the answers, but because it gives us better questions. The truth is, every type comes with its own lessons. Every type experiences conditioning. Every type has moments when living according to its design feels challenging. And every type brings something to the world that none of the others can bring in quite the same way. If you imagine an orchestra, you wouldn't expect every musician to be playing a violin. The percussion system isn't failing because they aren't playing the flute, and the cello isn't trying to sound like a trumpet. Each instrument has its own voice, its own purpose, its own contribution to the music. The beauty isn't found in everyone sounding the same. It's found in the harmony that's created because they're different. I think humanity works much the same way. We don't need more people trying to become someone else. We need more people becoming fully themselves. Because when generators build what excites them, manifesting generators create and innovate, when projectors guide with wisdom, when manifestors courageously initiate, and when reflectors help us see ourselves more clearly, the entire world benefits. So, wherever you find yourself today, I hope this episode has given you something that human design has given me over and over again. Permission. Permission to stop apologizing for the way your energy naturally works. Permission to trust that your path might not look like someone else's. Permission to rest when you need rest, to move when you need to move, to grow and change and become more of who you've always been. Because I truly believe that that's what this work is about. Not becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before the world convinced you needed to be someone else. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And as always, if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who could use this reminder. If you've been curious about your own human design, you can also download your free chart through the link in the show notes below. And before we wrap up, I also want to remind you, if you've been enjoying the podcast and you'd like to help support it, there's now a simple way to do that through the link in the show notes. It's completely optional, but every bit of support helps me continue creating these episodes and sharing this work with all of you. More than anything, thank you for being here and listening and for allowing me to be part of your journey. Until next time, may you honor the energy that was always yours. May you stop measuring your path against someone else's. And may you remember that your greatest gift is simply being who you were designed to be. Take what you've heard today even further by joining my newsletter community. Each week, you'll receive journal prompts and reflections connected to the episode that are designed to guide you in bringing these conversations off the podcast and into your own journey. Let's keep going deeper together. The link is waiting for you below.